Star Wars The Last Jedi. We've seen it. You've seen it. Let's talk spoilers. Hello, I'm Dan Murrell.
I'm Roth Cornet. How about those raised parents?
This is our spoiler review for Star Wars The Last Jedi. So in case you didn't hear us just a few minutes ago or a few seconds ago, if you haven't seen Star Wars The Last Jedi, why are you watching this? Go watch it, come back. Roth, I know this is certainly a lot easier for us as reviewers to talk about this movie, able to talk spoilers, because there's so many things in this movie that they were very difficult to talk about without going into details. And we don't want to spoil really any details for people that haven't seen the movie yet.
Yes, unlike some other reviewers out there, we don't want to spoil anything.
Exactly.
Well, we do our best. And then sometimes I think that people do accidentally allude to things, but certainly we do our very, very best not to mention things specifically. In this case, one of the big things that we talked about coming out of this was that it felt like information overload almost.
So much to process.
Yes.
And I was very happy, actually. I got a chance to go see it last night with a opening night crowd, which is always fun for any big movie, but Star Wars particularly is so much fun. And I was so happy I got a chance to see this movie a second time, because this movie throws so much at you that it takes a minute to just kind of compute. And I really went into that second screening last night thinking, okay, kind of mapping out in my head, here's what I liked from the first one. Here's what I was on the fence about. Here's some things I didn't like. Will this change and adjust some things? It did change some things for me. There were other things that cemented that I liked more. There were some things that I liked less the second time. But this movie still is one that has a lot to offer. Some things we're already seeing. There are fans that maybe weren't fans of The Force Awakens that are liking more about this movie. There are some things about this movie that were maybe huge fans of The Force Awakens and other Star Wars movies that they don't like about this movie. It's crazy out there.
It's really interesting, and we both suspected this would happen, that it would be a very hotly debated film because Rian's making choices that will impact the rest of the franchise. And here's the thing, is that there was a segment of the Star Wars fan base that said, you know, F your Snoke theory and F Rey's parents. Let's be done with connecting all the dots, and she's not a Skywalker. You got what you wanted.
You did.
Seemingly. Well, that's something I want to talk to you about.
Yes.
That's something. What can we believe Kylo's as a narrator? Is he a trustworthy source of information in that regard? However, that aside.
Yes.
For now.
Seemingly not important.
Parents were a couple of drunks. And that was a very deliberate decision on the part of Rian Johnson that played in thematically to the rest of the film, which was F you midichlorians, F you destiny, F you magical birth, F all of that, and we are all equally important, except that she's still special. So that's where it gets a little murky, right?
There's so much murkiness, and I feel like, you know, the overwhelming question that I've been asking and that so many fans are asking, it breaks down to, like, did this movie work for them? Did this movie not work for them? And so I think what we can do as reviewers as we go into the spoiler review is break down what in this movie worked for us and where this movie didn't work for us. Let's start with what worked for us.
Sure.
And I have several things on my list. The first thing that worked for me in this movie in a big way, much like Han Solo, Harrison Ford as Han Solo in the last movie, maybe even a little more so though, I loved, even more the second time, Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker.
Oh.
I thought he was great. I think that they did not take Luke where I think a lot of people did, and he did not have the arc in this movie that I thought a lot of people wanted him to have. But I loved how he played the character. I think he played this kind of haunted, dark version of Luke that's really disquieting a lot of Star Wars fans very well. And I really loved, but there were times where he, like the scene where he's talking to R2-D2, where he slips back into that. You see the Luke from the original trilogy. I think Mark Hamill was great in this movie, and I think he really had a really strong return to this role.
You know, and it's funny because he had some initial reservations about the direction that Rian Johnson was taking Luke with this film. And I can understand that and having that ownership. And he was this figure, this heroic figure, right?
Yeah.
And he had that journey. And now he's someone that has been through a lot. He's older. He's lonely. He's
bitter. He's afraid.
Bitter. He's afraid. He has cut himself out from the only thing that he ever had in his life, which was the Force.
Yeah.
And he's left really with nothing but porgs and those nun creatures. And it's very heartbreaking. And yet in the course of this movie, he rises again and he refines himself. And so I thought it was a gorgeous arc. I loved what he did with Luke. I am very in favor of it, but I also understand that there are probably some fans out there going like, this is not the Luke I know.
Yeah, and not so much even like the big thing that I have with Luke is the way I felt with his death, the way that they kind of treated Han Solo's death in the first movie, which is like, this is a monumental event in the Star Wars mythology, and I felt like the movie didn't give it not the fanfare, but it seems like it was just another event that happened at the end of this movie. He disappears. Leia and Rey say, Luke's gone, and Leia's like, yeah, I know, and then they just keep going. And I feel like there's some work for JJ, I think, to do in Episode 9 to really help that hit home. They did that a little bit with Han Solo in this one. I feel like they dealt with the ramifications of his death that kind of softened it a little bit. My criticism in Episode 7 a little bit, but Mark Hamill himself, I think, great. At Hamill himself was great in his return to Luke.
I think he was too. Whatever reservations he had, they did not come across on the screen, and he fully committed himself to that role. Mm-hmm. I will say that Luke's story opens some questions about how the Force works and what can and cannot be done. Yeah. I loved that final sequence where he was basically like trolling Kylo, you know. But it is. It's certainly interesting.
Was he trolling the fan base as well? I think we might talk about that a little bit later, because I have some thoughts on that might go on the other side of the fence for me. Another thing that worked for me a lot was, and it's advanced already into one of my favorite scenes from any Star Wars movie, bringing back Yoda. For that cameo. Now, this is a thing that could go very wrong. I think the trilogy has done this very poorly, particularly in the prequels, where you bring back a character and it just feels obligatory and it feels like out of place, disjointed, stopping the movie. The scene between Luke and Yoda was so in line with what you know of those two characters, and so well written, just beautifully written. No longer, I mean, still teacher and student, but now Jedi Master to Jedi Master. This was something that could have ruined the movie in a weird way if it had been done wrong. I love that scene between those two.
I love that sequence as well, and I think you're right, because it does what I think the movie in total often does well. Yeah. Which is that Rian Johnson's very aware that he's making a Star Wars movie. And in some moments that becomes self-reflexive to the point of, are we getting a little too meta here and taking us out of the story itself? And in other moments, he finds that perfect balance where he is aware of the world as he's in and delivering upon it. And so it does harken back, like Yoda is sort of scolding him, the same problems that you had when I was training you are the same problems that you have now, which is that you're never in the moment. You're never, all these years later, even just sitting on this island, and you can't just sort of be in the moment of your life. And he gave him the piece of wisdom that he needed to move forward. It also is interesting to me in as much as Rian undercuts the idea of a destined chosen one. He scores it here, right? So Rey, in this moment, Yoda says, we can't lose her. We absolutely can't, because she's very, very important and very, very special. So I feel like Rian Johnson in his own mind is struggling with the part of him that just wants to make it the Force is for everyone.
The Jedi, and the Jedi Order.
And the Jedi Order. And the part of him that has to adhere to this idea that's already been set up.
It's the thing of tradition, and let's burn it down. Let's burn everything to the ground.
The whole movie is this tension point, and it's in that scene, it's executed perfectly, I think.
I think it was great. Kylo Ren and Rey, for me,
love them.
Continue to be the two most interesting characters in this trilogy.
And they should be.
And they should be. They were cemented as being the absolute center of it. And I think still Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver incredibly well acted. There were some issues, again, that we'll talk about in a second, with how they were written as far as their actions, but I have no qualms with the performances. And I like that again, this movie deepened their characters. They didn't seem to be in a sense of stasis. They both grew, their arcs continued. They were the ones, and I think it was pretty obvious, they were the ones that Rian Johnson cared about the most.
Yes.
And they continue to be the ones that I like the most in this series. And I'm still going into Episode 9, their two storylines continue to be the ones that I'm most engaged in and want to see where it's going.
Yes, and I think that I alluded to this a little bit in our not our spoiler-free review, which is this. because Rian Johnson is doing scene after scene after scene where he's setting you up for certain expectations and then he subverts them. So a lot of times it's in the mission scenes, right?
Yeah.
So he's setting you up to go, oh boy, I bet Poe really gets it, and this dumb admiral over here is too much of a bureaucrat or whatever, and they're making the wrong choice. And then at the end of the day, no, Poe was wrong. He was being a hothead, and he continued to. That's just one example.
Right.
But throughout the film, he was setting you up and then taking away your expectation. And the great thing about that is that because these actors were so perfectly cast, Adam Driver is the perfect doe-eyed in his feelings Kylo Ren, who's able to be both scary and we have empathy for him at the same time. And Daisy Ridley, I think, is perfectly cast as well. You're left wondering in this beautiful place of, I don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
I really don't know if he's going to be able to bring her over.
Is she going to turn?
Is he going to turn?
It's legitimately, I didn't know. I didn't know.
To pull that off is pretty remarkable. So I think that's one of the strongest elements of the movie. Gets bogged down by some other things.
Some other things we can talk about.
And I liked their fight sequence. I think we're going to get into that later.
We are going to get about that, the difference between the sequence and the story, because those are two different things, and I'm on opposite sides of it.
Me too.
Two new additions to the cast. We talked about, obviously, Daisy Ridley, Adam Driver, carryovers from The Force Awakens, Kelly Marie Tran, and Laura Dern. I thought were both great.
I think that they were, first of all, Laura Dern could not be more excited to be, both of them, Kelly Marie Tran and Laura Dern could not be more excited to be in a Star Wars movie. They are us. They are us.
Particularly Kelly Marie Tran. You could practically
crying.
See how excited she through her performance. Like when she meets Finn, it's like I'm meeting someone from Star Wars. You can tell that she was watching the last one, and now it's like, oh my God, I'm in a Star Wars movie. That translated perfectly.
And I think it becomes, in a weird way, that becomes one of those meta moments where she, and this was a little bit in The Force Awakens too, she is standing in for us, the audience, who's just like blown over to be in the presence of this hero. And then she learns that he's very human and flawed. And that's what Ryan is delivering that message over and over and over again.
Yeah.
People are human. Dark side and light are intermixed. There is no black and white in this world of black and whites and absolutes, which is amazing because, again, he's in that tension point. Here's my thing. I want them, because I loved her character and I loved Laura Dern's character, and I thought that actually worked well to fill in for Leia. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
I wish they had their own movie, because the trouble is, I loved her.
Right.
I liked their relationship a lot, but it took a ton of screen time in a movie where it both needed it and didn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's one of my biggest detractors, particularly with Kelly Marie Tran and Rose, was love her character, not a lot of consequence to do in this movie. And that's... Again, it's
she just sort of had.
I'm with this. I feel like the lightsaber with this movie. I feel like the lightsaber between Kylo Ren and Rey in that scene. I'm just like, I feel both sides pulling on me, and I'm in the middle, like, oh my God, I just want to split down the middle, because there's so many. When this movie is great, it is so good, unbelievably great. But the things that don't work about it are pulling me so far in the other direction that I'm finding it difficult to kind of resolve which side ultimately I'm going to fall on. I'm skewing towards the good side, because I can't deny the heights that it hits that Rian Johnson brings to this movie. I think are incredible.
This will be the Star Wars movie that has the most think pieces written about it.
I think so too.
Since the original trilogy.
Yeah. Before we go to the dark side of the Force, a couple other things. John Williams, I thought, great score.
Yeah.
Just you can't. There's no substitute for that, and you can tell when it's John Williams and when it's not John Williams. And I thought but even this one, more than some of his other more recent films, this just felt like a classical Star Wars score. I thought it was a great score. The trilogy, I think, is continuing to just nail casting and performances. They're crushing it, both returning and new. I think they're doing great on that. The Force. I like that. Cool. This was the best kind of analysis, really, of like what the Force, not just what it is, but its interaction with the Jedi and how it's tied into the planet and the Earth, and what the dark side is, other than something bad that the dark side has. Because there's always, you don't know the power of the dark side, and then the prequels is all about the dark side can give you powers, but when Luke kind of sat Rey down and said, like, balance. And she's like, the dark side wants to show me something. And he's like, that's right, because the dark side has something that you need. And this idea of, like, you see now when people talk about being turned to the dark side, of the allure of the dark side, this to me was the best, most succinct way of having characters explain, like, what it is about the dark side. Like, it's not just bad, it's very seductive.
Sure. Yeah. And I think here's the other thing, is that one of my favorite things, and I'm like you, I am that lightsaber, because one of my favorite things that he did in this movie was the lore. And I know that's not, and please don't be mad at me, because I know that's not going to be true for every fan, and I get it, and you probably know way more than I do.
Yeah.
That's fair. But what I loved about it was that it does feel like the culmination of what they were aiming towards from the very beginning, which is the idea of actual balance. Balance doesn't mean two split forces.
Right.
Balance means integration. All of us, every human being, and this is a story that's about being human, set in this other world.
Right.
All of us have light and dark.
Right.
Wherever there's light, there's shadow. The thing that you're best at is also your biggest fault,
Yeah.
most of the time.
And the rise of one is the rise of the other.
Exactly.
You can't destroy one at the
expense of the other.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, and that's true inside of, meaning like the more light you have, the more shadow you have to deal with as well.
Yeah.
Right. And that's sort of the metaphor of the entire story. So to me, I always thought we were heading towards gray force and the actual integration, the actual balance of the force in an individual, and then in the society, and then in the whole, in the galaxy.
Yeah.
That's what I thought we were heading towards. And instead of having it in two people,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And so I feel like this movie heads us more where I thought we should go in that sense, and that the destruction of the Jedi are not destroyed now. Although, who's training her? Anyway, whole other question.
Ghost Luke.
Yeah, Ghost Luke. I suppose that she should be trained by a whole, like, she got the books.
She got the books.
Page turner, they're burned. Page turners, they are not. Yeah, but so anyway, long story endless is that I loved. I fell in love with that because that is what it should be, you know? And maybe that's really what's going to happen for Kylo and for Rey.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So here's where I think we can put the key in to turn to both where this... Oh, sorry, go ahead. Two more things. Sorry.
Cinematography.
Yes. Beautiful.
And this is perhaps the most emotionally important thing, Leia.
Yeah. Leia.
I thought the way that Leia was handled was stunning. She got her due. They didn't take the cop-out that I thought. This was another point where he subverted expectations, where it looked like Kylo was going to kill her, and then he didn't. And the fact that Leia survived the film and was there for us throughout, I don't know what they're going to do next.
I have no clue.
But I thought they handled Leia beautifully, and she deserved it.
And she was great.
She was great.
Carrie Fisher was great in that role. And I was torn between... I don't know. I like that we're going to get more Leia in episode 9. I don't know, who knows how much, but there's another part of me that's kind of says, and I know that episode 8 I think was done, her parts at least were done filming, I think, when she passed away, unfortunately, about this time last year. But there's part of me also that wonders if they could, you know, if she and Laura Dern had reversed roles, and then you have Laura Dern, who was so strong in this movie, taking that torch onto the next movie. That's not a criticism. It's just a what if. You know, I wonder how that would have been reacted to versus, I don't know what they can do in episode 9. That's speculation, but I thought Carrie Fisher was really good in this movie. Better than I thought she was even in The Force Awakens. She had more to do. She had more to say. She had more to do.
And she was. It was interesting to see her be empowered in that way, and so that they did tap into that. And again, like, this is where that tension point is, because Luke says that, like, just in describing the Force and what it is, which you're right, it's the most beautiful description. It does feel like it's for everyone, and yet there are just some people that are more attuned and able to access it for whatever reason. Some people can sing.
That's true. I can't. Some
sing.
people can kind of sing. That's how it goes. So I think this is the hinge onto which this discussion and onto which so many people debating this movie are going to turn, which is Rian Johnson.
Yes.
Who came into this, and they hired him for this reason, to put his singular stamp onto Star Wars and really onto this movie. And I think that is where this movie's greatest strengths lie. I also think in a weird way that it's like the Force. It's also where I think a lot of its greatest weaknesses lie. So let's go with strengths first with him. The look of this movie, he had such fondness for the older movies, and he had so many visual touches that tied it together. The fact that Yoda looked like puppet Yoda and not cartoon CGI Yoda. The fact that, I even noticed in some of the distances, like the AT-STs moved still like they were done in stop motion, and the doors still had that kind of sped up frame look when they closed. Like, he integrated the look of the two with modern effects, but also with a fondness, and I think that was a great meshing of the two. And then just the overall style of the film, but also the fact that this was more his movie, I think, than a Star Wars movie. And I think that is where everyone's falling on either side, is to what degree does that help the movie, and to what degree does that hurt the movie?
So I love Rian Johnson, and we talked about that. I've said this several times, so forgive me, but this isn't, you're right in the sense that Rian Johnson makes movies about movies.
Yeah.
He makes movies about genres. He comments on the history in Looper, in Brick, in The Brothers Bloom, and now in Star Wars. However, I think it's in a lot of moments the exact blending of those two things. And then in some moments, there's a divergence on both sides.
Yeah.
Meaning, Rian Johnson, if he were making this movie and didn't have all of these characters that he had to service, likely would have honed in and made about an hour and 40-minute movie that was far tighter, that honed in on the central characters and was explosively impactful.
Yeah.
But he had to service these characters.
And I think he did, but I think the two that took the brunt of it were Finn and Rose, returning character and a new character. I feel like Rian Johnson was really, really interested in telling the story of Rey and Kylo Ren and Ben Solo and Luke and Leia. And the other ones, he was just like, and I have to give them something to do, because I don't think that Finn and Rose's storyline really tied into the rest of the movie at all. It felt, the first time that I was watching it, it just felt like filler, and like it seemed obvious. They have to go to a planet to find a guy who they don't find, to break into a building, which they break into, but they don't achieve the thing that they were supposed to do. It's a complete failure of a mission. So then they join back with the rebels. They were with them to begin with, having not accomplished anything at their mission that they've gone into at all. And then even then at the end, Finn is going to make a sacrifice that he doesn't make. I just feel like they were legacy characters that were handed into this movie that Rian Johnson felt obligated to give a large chunk of the story to, but that I don't think was overly consequential to the movie. And I don't think the movie's better for it.
Well, here's where I'm very, very torn, because I think a lot of the things that you just mentioned were what I was talking about in terms of him continuously subverting expectations. You think they're going to get the guy with the flower. They don't. They get this other guy. Maybe this other guy is going to be the deal. He's not. He's going to betray you for cash. You think Finn's going to make this big epic sacrifice. He doesn't. I'm glad, because he's still around. But
sure, I'm not saying I want Finn to die. Don't get me wrong.
No, I know. But so I think that because he was keeping us off balance the whole time, that helped us be off balance with Rey and Kylo, and maybe it serviced it that way. However, it was diluting to the overall experience because it was a different story, and I felt like I was fragmented. But I think Finn and Rose are awesome characters. I love those characters. Right. And I think they're important to be included in a big epic Star Wars movie as well. Poe also, same thing. Like, he just had to have business to do.
Well, yeah, Poe's storyline, again, that I felt like was... I don't like movie storylines that require characters to not communicate with each other, because I feel like that's a cheap way to manufacture conflict. And again, with Poe's whole storyline with Laura Dern, with Holdo, was this idea of she has a plan, he doesn't think that she has a plan, and so everything that he does, including sending Finn and Rose out to go and find the Kroth so that they can get the guys, so that they can disable the things, so that they can go to light speed, is all because Holdo's saying, he's saying, do you have a plan? And she's saying, I'm not going to, get off my bridge. And I get the point of just like, at the end they're like, well, she was more interested in, saving the rebels than she was in, being this huge leader. But at the same time, I think that it stretched that amount of non-communication beyond, to me, what I believe to be the point of reason, to where I'm just like, just pull the guy aside and say,
have
like,
a conversation.
Chill. I've got a plan. I don't want everyone to know about it. Just chill, cool your jets. if you trust Leia, then trust me and we'll get through it. And I feel like he would have responded to that. So that was, again, I felt like that was narratively a way to kind of kick the can down the road, eat up about 15, 20 minutes of screen time, to where the rebels being on these transports to the planet you could have gotten there without these 14 extra steps in between. And again, when you're looking at a movie this long, and also at a story that's so kind of honed in on Luke and Kylo and Rey, that it just feels unnecessary to me. And that's a personal thing. I mean, if you like the stuff, I'm not saying you don't, but I mean, when I look at a narrative and I say, like, I see these story beats that were so unnecessary, especially when there's 45 minutes of the movie is devoted to this, that's where I say, like, I don't really know if this was necessary.
Yeah, and I think that you're right. Lost used to be so guilty of that, by the way.
Just sending people around in circles
the damn
for no reason.
Forest.
Yeah.
The jungle, and then they would bump into each other. Like, how are you bumping into each other in the jungle?
It's a massive jungle.
In any event.
Whatever.
Back to this. I am very split, because I do think there's like a 140, like a 1 hour and 40 minute movie that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's honed in. And I think that I really fell in love, especially with Rose. And I loved these characters. I wish it was a different movie. I just wish they had gotten a different movie that I could watch, a separate Star Wars movie, so that we could have two fully formed films and storylines with these great characters. That's sort of where I'm torn on that.
Yeah.
Can we discuss Domhnall Gleeson real quick?
Sure, let's talk Domhnall.
Domhnall, pardon me. He became...
He's a cartoon character in this movie.
I really love him as an actor, and this was so arch. It didn't fit in my mind.
I mean, he was over the top at Force Awakens, almost too much for me. But this one, he is just the snivelingest most, and I get that that's his only character trait. But he went very arch, and from the very beginning, like a lot of people love that scene with him and Poe, in the bridge that opens the movie. I didn't. It just wasn't for me. A lot of the humor beats to me felt forced in this film, and I'm not saying that you can't have laughs in a movie. You can absolutely have laughs in a movie. Some of the beats in this movie felt a little forced, that being one of them. But I think sometimes they use dramatic characters for comedy beats, which is where I think you fall into some... It's a trap sometimes. And that was one of them. But yeah, he was almost used as comic relief or as comedy in this movie. And it took an archetype from Force Awakens to, I agree with you, he was very cartoonish.
Yes, it went too far. And I do think that the comedy beats were because Rian Johnson has a lot of comedy beats. Like Brothers Bloom to me is hilarious.
Yeah.
But those felt like not mandated, but that's where I think he felt like he was trying to satisfy a particular tone and make sure they're laughing and they're entertained, which is great. A lot of it was really funny, but a lot of it, we've talked about this previously, just seemed to undercut some of the emotional impact.
Yeah. I want to talk about character moments versus story moments because this was something that bothered me a lot. Both screenings I've been into, the biggest applause moment was the Rey and Kylo team up fight, and
it was cool.
It was awesome. Like, seeing that fight scene was awesome. However, an awesome fight scene is not enough for me to excuse what I think was a very sketchy narrative thing to do, which is to have two characters that are opposites, that are enemies, team up for a cool fight scene that audiences laugh at, and then 30 seconds they go, "I hate you, and we're enemies again," and then they split again. And that to me was an opportunity to get these two characters together because you want them to do a cool fight scene, but then it's not interesting if they're friends, so you have to immediately split them apart to become enemies again. And now it's as if none of this had ever happened, because once again you've got Rey with the Rebels, Kylo Ren with the First Order. They are fighting each other and they're enemies, and I feel like they spent a whole movie building up to bringing these two characters together in order to service an applause moment, only to, once you've achieved that applause moment, say, never mind, they're enemies again, and immediately split them apart again. I'm not on board with that. That's one of the things that bothered me the most about this movie. Was I was so intrigued with what these two were going to do once they got together. And the answer to what are they going to do once they get together is they're going to briefly team up for an admittedly awesome fight scene and then split up, and they're essentially in the same place at the end of this movie that they were at the beginning of the movie, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
It really bothers me.
I mean, it doesn't, that particular sequence doesn't bother me quite as much as it does bother you, because I think that he was using that respite to say, perhaps they are now united and allow us to believe. It was one of those other things where he was like, you think it's this, but it's not. And it was a really well-crafted fight sequence. I mean, it was just beautifully
great fight
done.
scene, but a great fight scene does not a great movie make.
But it doesn't have, say, the emotional resonance of the battle, even a far more sparse scene, which was between Obi-Wan and Vader.
Yeah.
Which is a relatively simple scene as compared to this, but it's far more powerful and impactful. That image is in my head right now. I can call it up like this. I agree with you. Those are two very different things. One is just servicing a momentary, like a glory moment.
Yes.
And one is a total service to the characters in the stories.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think they played a little fast and loose with the Force, and the characters having powers that we
don't know
about?
I want to hear from the people that know about it. You know what I mean? Because I feel like perhaps there is precedent for that in the lore that maybe I saw and didn't even notice. You know what I mean? Not in the films, because we would know that.
Sure.
But elsewhere, perhaps. I don't know.
It felt like that a little bit to me. Leia's Superman scene, Heisman thing was a little strange to me, just because I've never seen anyone. I'm not saying that you can't do that with the Force, but it seemed like a little over the top even for the Force. And then Luke's projecting himself. Again, that's something that I'm not saying you can't do that with the Force, but it's a power that I didn't know that Jedi had. Whether or not it's been established that they can do that, it's something that, again, for me, felt a little like, oh, I don't care about this as much as you wanted me to, because I feel like you're playing a little fast and loose with the concept of what can and can't be done with the Force. I'm not saying I haven't. This is an undecided issue for me, but it felt a little bit like you're using the Force as a bit of a cheat to get characters to be able to do things that normally they otherwise couldn't do.
I think that the emotional payoff for what Luke did worked well enough for me that I was befuddled for a moment, but I was also okay with it because it had expended so much of his energy. It literally killed him. Which made sense, that if you were going to do something that it would draw that much energy that you would then pass on.
Just
disappear from it. But and I also felt like that was you're fighting for literally nothing. I know I've used that word several times. Thank you. But I thought that reflected a lot about Kylo, that he's really fighting for nothing. It's not even there.
Yeah, that was it's a great Kylo moment, but Luke's death I'm skeptical about, but I'm open-ended because I feel like there's so much more that's going to be done in Episode 9. So I have not yet landed on Luke's the lonely passing of Jedi Master Luke Skywalker yet.
But it's like the Jedi Star Wars version of Fargo's, and all for what? A little bit of money? A little bit of money. That's, to me, it was Kylo, what you're fighting for doesn't matter. It's not even here.
Yeah. No, Luke, I think, has a lot more to say.
I think so too. I certainly hope so.
The last thing that I want to talk about, and I feel like this is probably what's behind most of the fans, a lot of the fans anyway, feeling a little, I'm going to use this word, betrayed by this movie. And that is the fact that I think it's a subject of the fact that it became obvious to me watching this movie that there was never really a large overarching picture for exactly how this trilogy was going to go.
No one knew. JJ and Ryan were not on the same page.
No, I think that JJ, when they wrote Episode 7, when they wrote The Force Awakens, there were certain things that were in that movie that I think JJ probably expected would be followed up in previous movies. And I feel like, much like with Finn and Rose and some other things, Rian Johnson, not too interested in. So there's the issue of Snoke, who I'm not going to say whether fans should have speculated, but I think The Force Awakens presented Snoke as a mythical figure, as a mysterious figure, as one that
of great
import, that many questions should be asked of, who is ultimately, other than being the bad guy in this movie, fairly inconsequential. He's used to get Rey and Kylo to run together, and then just pretty much dispatched and forgotten. And then the subject of Rey's parentage, which again, I'm not saying this is another question that was treated in the previous movie as one of great import of speculation that is, at least right now, said resolved to be non-important. Who are Rey's parents? Nobody. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, here's my take on this. And
there's two different sides to this, and I'm sympathetic to both.
Me too. And I'm undecided. This is the one that I'm undecided about. And here's why. I did a video called This Is Who I Think Snoke Is the next day after the Force. I was one of those people.
Right.
And with my colleague, and I was one of those people speculating about it. And this is what feels almost impossible about this for me. One is that I hope this doesn't happen because then it's just ludicrous, but JJ really could come in and undo this undoing. He could come in and say Kylo was lying, and actually this is your parent.
Right.
And there is a big significance to it. He could do that. I hope he doesn't, because Kylo's probably an untrustworthy narrator, right?
He's extremely untrustworthy.
Yeah. So for him to reveal that piece of information without any confirmation from anywhere else, we don't absolutely know that that's true, which I don't totally like, because it feels a little loosey-goosey to me. And then the second thing is, so I will say as a fan, and again, you guys, there are many of you that are more devoted than me. However, as someone that really does love this universe, I kind of wanted it to be a tie-in, but I'm also pleased that it wasn't, because I think he really drives home. This is a Star Wars movie that for the first time in a series of films about war is dealing with war profiteering, and the fact that both the good side and the bad are benefiting and profiting from it, and the fact that that is reflected in that gray area of dark and light are not totally separate. We are all one is that kind of human message, which is cool. But as a fan, do you feel like you were set up and let down? These
are the things. I feel like I was definitely set up. And here's where I kind of fall on this was...
And Snoke does not matter.
Here's there a lot of people are saying this is a brilliant move because Rian Johnson, this is not going to turn out the way that you think it is. And this movie was about subverting fan expectation and telling people that, these movies aren't about these fan theories, that they're about war profiteering and the humanity and the idea of a oneness and everything.
Equanimity.
That's fine, but I think what's showing here and what bothers me a little bit is this idea of, Snoke and Rey's parents aren't things that fans started speculating about independently. The reason that there is so much fan speculation, or was, about Snoke and Rey's parents was that the previous Star Wars movie established a universe and told the story in a way that encouraged fans and really it kind of hinted that the entire crux of the story lies in these two overriding mysteries. There's a reason these were the two main questions that people had coming out of The Force Awakens. The reason that fans were speculating on this is that the last Star Wars movie told them that these were important questions to ask.
Absolutely.
And so I absolutely understand why so many fans now, when this next movie comes out and basically pulls the rug out from under you and says, psych, nothing, none of it matters. All of that time that you spent trying to figure this out is completely useless, and here's another completely different story for you to think about. I understand why so many fans are saying wait, no, you set the rules to this game, and now you're changing the game out from under me and saying that none of it matters, but you're the ones that told me that it mattered.
Yeah.
I see both sides of this, and I think what it shows is a lack of long-term planning on the part of Lucasfilm and knowing what is going to happen in these movies. It kind of proves to me that they made The Force Awakens without knowing what was going to happen in specific detail, at least in Episode 8 and Episode 9. And I think the problem that I have with this movie in general isn't so much just about Snoke and Rey's parents. I think that is a symptom of the fact that J.J. Abrams made The Force Awakens, then it came to Rian Johnson. Rian Johnson didn't have a whole lot of interest in the universe that J.J. Abrams made in The Force Awakens, so he decided in The Last Jedi that he was going to kind of rewrite parts of it and discard parts of it, what he didn't want, reframe the story, reframe the characters, put everything in it, so that by the end of Episode 8, the universe was where he wanted it to be. The problem being that he had to go back and undo a lot of The Force Awakens to do that.
JJ.
And now here comes JJ again. So I think what I'm so conflicted about this movie is it didn't so much seem like Star Wars Episode 8 as far as like I'm telling this great overarching story. It seemed like almost a reset button of, okay, I'm going to come in and reset everything in this universe to get it to where I want it to be. And it almost felt like a reboot. And now I'm 2 movies in and I don't know anything further about this story or where we're going or what's happening than I did at the beginning of this one, or really at the beginning of The Force Awakens. That's what I'm struggling with. I think this is a movie that had a lot of great moments and it soars in a lot of places and it has great character moments. It has so many great things going about it, but I don't think it told a particularly strong story. And I don't think it was really interested in doing that in a larger scale. And that's where I struggle with this movie. There's so much to admire, but I don't think it was a great piece of storytelling, if I'm being honest.
I think 2 quick stories. One, it's about Lost again. J.J. Abrams set up the pilot for Lost. He pointed to Locke, played by Terry O'Quinn.
Yeah.
Terry Quinn.
This is a very important person.
He said he's got a secret to Damon Lindelof. And Lindelof said, great, what is it? And he said, figure it out. And it felt a little bit like he did the same thing with Rian Johnson. There's a secret. What is it? I don't know. Figure it out.
Not even, I don't know. He went to Rian Johnson and said, these people have secrets. And Rian Johnson said, yeah, I don't care.
Anyway. The secrets are, and Rian Johnson said basically, yeah, exactly, like the secrets are irrelevant to me.
Yeah.
But here's the second point I'm going to make. I think the fan base will be 50-50 on this, and this is why. It's not that Rian Johnson wasn't listening to the fan base. He was just listening to one half of it. And people like, say, Jenny Nicholson, who is a huge Star Wars fan and I adore, probably she loves this because she wanted Snoke to be no one and of no consequences. And she wanted Rey's parents to be completely unrelated to the rest of the saga. She got exactly that. And there's probably a lot of people just like her.
There are.
That will be very satisfied with those answers. And where I'm okay with it is that I think it underscores the message that he's telling, the story that he's telling emotionally and thematically in this movie, which we've discussed in terms of what it means to be good or bad, right or wrong, Force, gray Force, all that.
Yeah.
I think it actually falls right in line with that message. So that's where I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Where I'm torn is the part of me that likes the mystery and the saga and the Skywalkers and all of it. And I think that's probably the lesser part of me. And I think that this is a movie that it has a ton to chew on intellectually.
Yeah.
And perhaps doesn't resonate as profoundly as somehow a simpler story, or not a simpler story, but a different story might. And I just don't want then JJ to come in and undo it again, because then it's like, okay, you guys.
Then you've lost. Then we're at the end.
Yeah.
And what have we accomplished?
Yeah.
I'm much like Kylo Ren. I have great conflict in me. I think where I'm set, like I said, I've had two viewings. I've had time to let it sit. And I think where I've settled on the movie is it hits so many high notes that I can't say that it's not worth it, but there is a lot to me that also hits a bad note. So it is still, I'm still very mixed on this movie, mixed to positive, but it is going to be, again, you bring in Rian Johnson to shake things up. You bring in Rian Johnson to put his stamp on the Star Wars universe. Well, guess what? He did it, and we'll go from here.
Yes, we will. I would say that I need another viewing. I've just had the one, which was a lot to take in.
Yes.
But a Star Wars movie that has us talking into the start of our Christmas party here at the office.
I know this feels as long as The Last Jedi.
It was. And you know what? Oh, well, we did it. A movie that has that much to chew on, I can't say that that's not worthy.
Yeah.
Right?
I've never talked this long about a Transformers movie.
Exactly.
And that's a positive.
Like, I can't say that that's not, it's giving us things to think about.
Yeah. I think he probably knew that he was going to face this kind of mixed reception, and then we'll see where the fan base goes from here. But if you liked it, I get it. If you didn't like it, I understand.
If you are that lightsaber, we are also you.
We are the lightsaber caught between Kylo Ren and Rey. I think that we're probably listing a little bit more towards Rey's side, but we get it. And this is this conversation is going to go on until the next Star Wars saga movie comes out in 2019, or Solo, or however many more come out. But yeah, this the discussion is just beginning on this.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't think a movie could be debated more than The Force Awakens, and I think that we were wrong.
Absolutely, 100%. This will continue to be debated. We want to hear from you and what you think in the comments below. Let's talk about the arguments and keep it lovely and nice and on the light side of the Force.
Exactly.
Why
Don't go to the
not?
dark. Don't go into the pit at the bottom of the cave under the island and to the infinite use that... I don't know quite what that was, but okay, whatever. It doesn't matter. Thank you so much for watching our spoiler review for The Last Jedi. Roth, where can the people find you?
I am Roth Cornet on the things.
I am at Murrell Dan on the Twitters and the other things, and we will be here next week to wrap up 2017.
And then vacation.
And vacation. It'll be so nice. May the Force be with you, and
And
may you
also
not,
with you.
and also with you, and may you not be the lightsaber between Kylo and Rey.